Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Becky Rufus, and today's tutorial is gonna be a continuation from the previous tutorial which we had on skirt drafting with bots contouring. So if you're yet to check that video, I advise you please check the video so as to be able to understand this video. And if you're new to my channel, kindly give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the notification button so as to be notified when a new video comes up. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here is my pattern placed for the front folded already. Now I'm going ahead on the side to mark 1.5 seam allowance. Now if you want to use more than 1.5, you can go ahead and mark your desired seam allowance. Started to use 1.5 seam allowance. So I'm going to mark that down to the skirt length and up to the waist. Now here is what I did. I added on the waistline up, I added 0.5 seam allowance, on the side 1.5, and at the hem over there I marked 2 inches. I'm moving on to the back. Here at the center back, I added 1 inch seam allowance because I don't want the center of the back where the zipper will be to be too bulky. So I added 1 inch at this point, and then at the side back, I'll be adding 1.5 seam allowance, and then on the waistline up, as you see, I left 0.5 seam allowance, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out. At the hem, I added 2 inches seam allowance. So what I just did here is the same thing as what I did for the front. So I'm just cutting it out at this point. At this side which I'm cutting, I added 1.5 seam allowance. Now here for the band, I already folded the fabric into 2, and at the center front, which I said will be unfold earlier on in the last video. Now at this waistline up, I'm adding 0.5 seam allowance over there because I'll be having 2 of these. One will serve as the lining and then the other will serve as the main fabric for the band. Now what I did here was to add 0.5 up, 0.5 inch down. Then at this side, which is serving as the center back, I added 1 inch seam allowance. And here I'm just trying to connect those lines together, half inch up, half inch down, then 1 inch seam allowance at the center back. Now I'll be cutting 2 for this. Don't forget, I said we'll be having 2 of these. One will serve as the main fabric and then the other will serve as the lining. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that out, the second part of the band out. Okay, so here is the front of the skirt, there's the back, and then I have my band and my band cut out already. Now here I'm just going to go ahead and cut the lining the exact same length and width as that of the fabric. And here is the back also. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the lining. Now what I'm doing here is to mark the center back. I'm using my chalk to indicate which part of the fabric will serve as the center back, and then on the side back here I went ahead to give it a notch. This is just to indicate which part is going to be the center back and then which side is going to be the side back also. At the hem here, I went ahead on the fabric to mark out the 2 inches hemming allowance which was added on the fabric. So here I just ruled it out, then I notched both sides. Now what I'll do is to fold the 2 inches up like this, then straighten my lining over it, like straighten it back out on it. Then the point at which the lining meets with the fabric, I'm just going to go ahead and mark it out with a chalk, because that is where the lining will be stopping. So I'm going to mark it out with the chalk on both sides. So I've marked it out on one side, and on the other side also I'm going to go ahead and mark it out. So that is where the lining is going to stop. So I'm going to connect this now on a straight line. Then instead of cutting directly on this line which I wrote, I'm going to leave half an inch. Now this half inch is for joining, because I'll be joining my lining to the fabric. I'll be sewing the two together. So the half an inch I left now is like a seam allowance to join it to the lining, to join the lining to the fabric. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing as what I did at the back for the front, which is rolling out the 2 inches, folding it over, bringing the lining over it, marking the points, and then leaving half inch seam allowance. Now here is the front of the skirt opened up with the lining. So I'm going to fold over my fabric, the 2 inches which I added, the 2 inches hemming allowance over to meet with the lining. Then I'm going to take this to the machine and sew. But before then, I'll be pinning them together. I'll take this to the machine now and stitch. Now here is the back of the skirt. Now what I'll be doing here now is to place the lining on it. Now don't forget we use the chalk to indicate which part will serve as the center back and then which side is serving as the side back. So as you can see, the center backs are fitting each other. Then I went ahead to pin the hem together. Then I'll be doing the same thing I did on the front pattern here on the front skirt. So I'll be joining them by half inch. So here it is after joining. As you can see, here is it after joining. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to open the front of the skirt up. I'm going to open this up now and then place the side back of the skirt on the side front of the skirt. So I'm going to be placing both sides together. Don't worry if they are not of the same shape. If you followed the tutorial I did on the previous video, you find out that they don't have the same shape at the end of the day. So all you just need to do is to open up the seam lines together like this. Open on the seam lines, pin it together, making sure they align. Then pin down the waist also of the fabric, pin down the waist of the lining, then move on and bring the edges together and pin them down. Make sure when you're pinning, the edges of both the side front and the side back are meeting, and then pin them down together. I'm going to repeat this on the other side also. So make sure the waist aligns, the seam lines also, you open up the seam and make sure they align. Bring the edges of both front and back together and then pin down. Now the next thing I went ahead to do here is to mark my 1.5 seam allowance which I added. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that out. And I'll be doing the same thing on the other side. Then I'll take this to my machine and run it down. Now I've done that on both sides and I've taken it to the machine to sew. Here is the outcome. Here is what it looks like from the outside. Here is what it looks like on the inside. I'm going to turn it so we see what it looks like. So after sewing, this is what you are expected to have. You can see all the seam lines are inside, not visible. So you have your seam lines on the inside, hidden. All right, so I'm going to take this to the ironing table, give it a good press. Then after that, I'm going to hold my darts on both fabric and lining separately. So I'm going to hold my darts over there, do the same thing on the lining also, hold them separately and bring it back. So after ironing and holding the darts, this is what we have. You can see it's looking nice already. It's nicely pressed and then it's coming out fine already. At the length of the skirt over here, I'm going to give it a notch on both sides. Like that. Now I decided to have a little slit of about 1 inch. So I'm going to measure out 1 inch at this point and then just use the chalk to mark it out. After marking out with the chalk, I'm going to give it a notch at that point also, making 2 notches which I have one at the length of the skirt and then one at the end of the slit at the point where the slit is going to get to. So I'm going to open it up right now and fold it into two, making sure the fabric is on the fabric, lining on the lining. Now at this point where the slit is going to get to, I'm just going to pin it down, then use the chalk to mark it like that. So after doing this, I'm going to fold the lining over like this and then remeasure the 1 inch I have on this other side and mark it with the chalk. And then at the right side here also, I'm going to mark the same 1 inch. This 1 inch is for the slits. Please let's have that in mind that this is for the slits. So what I'm going to do now, you can see the slit is just going to be about 1 inch. I don't want it too much because usually for this kind of skirt you don't need the slit because it's 17 inches long. I just want to have this little slit of like 1 inch. It's not compulsory. If you're making something this short, it's not compulsory. So now from the 1 inch, from that mark I have on the skirt, I'm just going to go ahead and mark out 1 inch for the stitch allowance. Then here I'm going to mark out the length of 9 inches for the zipper. Now I minus 1.5 for the band, then marked out 9 inches at the waist. So here I'm marking out 1 inch, 1 inch. So my seam is going to stop on the slit line, so it's just going to be a straight line. I'm not going to take it across. Now here I'm going to give this a pin down. I'm going to pin this down on both sides. Then at this end also, the same markings I have on the fabric, I'm going to transfer them to the lining also. So I'm going to bring the waist together like so, then flip it over to the other side and transfer the marking. So I'm just going to give it a small fold over, and at this point also I'm going to give it a small fold over just to transfer the markings which I have over there to the lining. Then I'm going to flip everything over to the lining part, then mark out 1 inch seam allowance like I did on the fabric to the lining like that. So I'm going to run a stitch on a straight line from the where my zipper is going to stop to where the slit is starting from, or to where the slit is stopping. So what I'm going to do now is to pin this down and run my stitch from here to this point. Now I've gone ahead and done that on both fabric and lining. You can see it's just a straight line I ran. I didn't run it across. So just a straight line down. Now what I'm going to do now is to bring those 2 points where my seam stopped, I'm going to bring the two together. What I'm just going to do is to fold them and bring them together like you see me doing. So I'm just going to show us again. Just going to redo this so to ensure that we get it right. So I'm going to open it up. You can see that my seam line is stopping at this point, as you can see at that point. Then here also the seam line stopped at the other side. You can see where the seam line is stopping, so I'm going to open it. You can see we have an opening here, so I'm just going to bring this point to this point. So I'm going to open it or folding it together, and you can see the seam lines are meeting. You can see they are meeting like that. Now I'm going to use a pin to hold it down so it doesn't shift. I'm going to hold it down, then move to the other side also of the skirt, and then making sure that those seam lines are meeting. I'm going to pin it down also like that. Then I'm going to continue my stitch down to the length of the slit, and here also down to the length of the slit, making sure not to sew over any of the slits. Now after stitching, you can see what I have. I stitch from here to that point. You can see what I did. Now the next thing I will do now to make that point relax is to notch at the point where the stitches meet on both sides. So I'm notching on both sides like this. Then I'm going to cut off ½ inch at that point. Now the main reason why I'm cutting off, I'm reducing the seam over there to ½ inch is so that that place will not be bulky. The slit is not going to be bulky after turning out. So I'm going to cut off 0.5, making sure to leave 0.5 allowance over at the point. So at the end you should have something like this. Then I'm going to push the mouth of the slit, give it a notch, and push the mouth of the slit out, as you can see. So I'm going to do that to the other side, give it a notch, and then push it out to the other side. As you can see, it's looking nice. The slit is looking so nice and then relaxed. Looking nice and relaxed and very neat. Now that's all we have for the slit. Here's the zipper I'm going to be using for the skirt, and then here is my band, the lining part of the band also. Now I'm going to remove the pattern from the band, then give it a notch at the point which I'll be joining to the skirt. Now I'm going to open it up and then place them on each other. So I'm going to open it up like this, open it up this way. Then I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the waistline. I'm close it up at the waistline. So I'm going to go ahead now and run the stitch across this point, which is the waistline. Now after stitching, this is what I have. Now I'm going to bring the skirts. I'm going to be joining the lining and then fabric to fabric on the band. So I'm going to give the center of the skirt a notch like this. Then on the band also, I'm going to give it a notch at the center. You can see it's going to be joined this way. So I've notched the center of the band. So I'm going to go ahead now and pin round on the skirts. I'm going to pin the band round on the skirts, making sure they align, they meet. Now I'm going to stitch down on the machine to stitch it down. Now I only joined one part of the band to the skirt, as you can see. So after stitching now, the next thing to do now is to join the zipper to the skirt. Now I'm going to open up and then fold the mouth of the zip. I'm going to fold it in the excess which is on the zipper. Then before joining, I'm going to go ahead now from the band, the fabric part of the band, mind you, and I'm going to mark 1 inch seam allowance down to where the stitch line stops on the skirt. So I'm going to continue marking down 1 inch seam allowance to the same line of the skirt at the center back. So now I'm going to place my zipper exactly on the chalked part on the skirt, starting from the band. I'm going to fold over this mouth, then place it directly on the marked 1 inch on the skirt. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin it down before sewing. After pinning, I'm going to go ahead now and stitch down the zipper on the skirts alone. Now mind you, I'm only stitching on the fabric, not on the lining. Here is it after stitching, as you can see. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the skirts. I'm going to go ahead also and stitch down on the other side of the skirt. I'm going to go ahead now and mark 1 inch on the fabric. I'm going to open up the zipper, then fold that part over, pin down and stitch on the zipper. Now I've gone ahead to stitch down, and then this is what I have after stitching. As you can see, now I'm going to turn to the lining part of the skirts, like so. Then I'm going to bring the lining part of the band towards the lining of the skirts. So I'm going to flip them like this, then I'm going to push them inside, making sure the right side of the band is facing the right side of the lining. So I'm going to be holding them together like this from the inside, as you can see. Then I'm going to stitch it round. So from the inside like this, I'm going to pin it down, then take it to the machine and then stitch around from the inside of the skirt. The sewing I'll be doing on this part now of the skirt will be from the inside, from that opening which we have on the zipper parts of the skirts. The same thing on the other side of the skirt, also making sure the right side or the shining part of your lining is facing the right part of the band. Then pin it down, and all the sewing is going to be from the zipper opening which we have at that point. So as you can see, turning it into the wrong side of the skirt, I'm going to go ahead and pin it down round, then stitch using 0.5 inch. Now after stitching, here is what you should have. As you can see, it's looking neat, it's coming out nicely. Okay guys, so I used red thread for this sewing so that I will be able to see the seam lines, the sewing which I have on the skirt. The next thing to do now is to close up the zipper side of the skirt. Now to make it easier to close, on the side seam of the skirt, the lining part of this, I went ahead to create an opening at this point about 3 inches. Then from that opening, I'm going to bring out the zipper allowance. So I'm going to dip my hand inside like this and bring out the zipper allowance from that opening, like you see me doing. So I'm just going to push the skirt out from that side and pick one side of the zipper. I'm going to place the lining part of the band over the fabric part of the band like you see me doing. So I'm going to fold my skirt into two like this. That's from the inside, pin it down at the waistline over here, then also pin it down at the end of the seam line which I have on the lining also. So I'm going to make sure the seam line I have over here aligns with that of the fabric, of the main fabric. Then I'm going to go ahead and pin down at that point. Then I'm going to flip it to the fabric side and run down on the same stitch line which I have there already. As you can see, after sewing, this is what I have. You can see the zipper in between the lining and the fabric. Then from that same opening which I created, I'm going to go ahead and drag everything out. Here is what one side of the skirt looks like. You can see my zipper is nicely hidden. There's no seam line showing at all, both on the lining part and on the fabric, both on the inside and on the outside. There is no seam line showing. From the same opening which I have on the lining, I'm going to dip my hand inside and go all the way to the other side and bring out the other zipper side which I have. I'm going to repeat the same procedure, which is basically pinning down the bands together, the lining part of the band and the fabric part of the band together, and taking it down to the seam line on the lining. And then pin down at that point also. Then I'm going to go ahead and stitch down following the same stitch line, the initial stitch line I have for the zipper. Now after stitching down, I'm going to stitch. After stitching, I'm going to push everything out from that same opening which I have. After doing that, this is the outcome, what it looks like after sewing. You can see how neat it is. I'm going to go ahead and drag the zipper up. You can see it's looking neat on the inside and then it's looking neat on the outside also. So I'm going to give this a good press. Then the side opening which I have over here, I'm just going to close it with a top stitch. So after closing it with the top stitch, this is what I have. You can see the seam is directly on top. It's something you can see. So I use the black thread to close that up. Skirt is ready. So this is what the skirt looks like. You can see it's looking neat. It's so neat. This is the back of the skirt, and then the slits looking neat. Now if you find this video helpful, kindly give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.